The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, my name's David Kramer. I'm with the Hennepin County Library Department, and we're here today in a discussion with series with author Dr. Aaron Haas. And Dr. Haas is the author of the book entitled The Gift of Fatherhood: How Men's Lives Are Transformed by Their Children. And the book captures the parenting process from the dad's perspective in terms of what it should be and ways to involve you more in the parenting process. Welcome, Dr. Haas.
Thank you.
Can you give me an idea of why you wrote the book and what your inspiration was behind it?
Well, I think that what's unique about the book is that most parenting books talk about the necessity for parents to be involved for the health of their children.
Mm-hmm.
My book, as you know, emphasizes the necessity of the father to be involved for his own mental health as well as for the health of his children, and also for the health of his marriage. I make the very, I think, important point in the book that the more involved you are as a father, the better your marriage is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
The better marriage you have, the more likely you are to be involved as a father as well. Now, the impetus for the book that you asked about, it really evolved over a period of time when so many of the middle-aged men I was treating in my office, in their mid-50s, whose children were already full-grown, perhaps had left the house, suddenly lamenting. I mean, suddenly these men would start crying in my office about the fact that they had never really taken the time to know their children, to establish a relationship with their children. They were often very career-driven, spent most of their life at the workplace, and knew that they had missed a unique opportunity.
And you can't get it back. That's one of the things you can't get back.
Exactly.
Yeah. I know that as a parent, I made some conscious decisions to take some things out of my life that were taking a lot of time so that I could spend it with my kids and share their childhood with them. Obviously, they're only going to be young once.
Exactly. Well, before we went on the air, we just talked about how your child just had his kindergarten graduation. Now, a lot of parents, and particularly dads, might go, well, it's no big deal. There'll be other graduations, and it's only kindergarten, and he's only 5. But he'll never have a kindergarten graduation as well, and you will never have an opportunity to experience the thrill that he has having graduated.
Right. Both my wife and I have been involved in the kindergarten class a lot, and it makes him feel good, too, to know that we care about that. So, in the prologue of the book, you talk about things that you were unprepared for in terms of becoming a parent. Things like the overwhelming feelings of love and protectionism that you would have for your children, the amount of energy it would take, how important changes in your life take place in terms of how you perceive life and the perspectives change. I agree with you. I don't think that anybody can ever be fully prepared to be a parent. There's no way you can read about it. There's no way you can talk with people about it. You have to experience it. And you know, in some ways, I think a mother cat has more instinctive feelings for being a good parent than people do, because there's just no way to prepare yourself. It's easier to get a driver's license than it is to become a parent than it is to get a driver's license. In many respects, there's no test you have to pass.
Yeah, I was quite candid in the prologue of my book when I said, despite the fact that I'm a professor of psychology and went through all those years of graduate training and had been in practice for many, many years, seeing families, counseling parents about how to handle their children, despite all of that, until I had my own first child when I was 36, I really did not fully appreciate the feelings that would emerge. In connection with that, I might mention one other thing. When I spoke with many fathers in preparation for writing the book, and I would ask them the question, what surprised you most when you became a father? By far the most common response was how difficult it was going to be. That is, when we imagine being a parent, whether it be a father or a mother, our fantasies are always very pleasant ones. They're holding the baby and giggling with the baby and perhaps fantasizing about playing ball with your child, fantasizing perhaps even when the child is older and going to their high school graduation, seeing them go out on their first date, whatever it might be, their first communion, whatever it might be. They're always pleasant fantasies. We never fantasize about the colic, the tantrums, the sleepless nights, what we discussed before we went on about the constant feeling of sleep deprivation. So whether you're a mother or a father, no one prepares you for those elements.
I agree. I think that there is that low-grade fatigue that's there all the time, and you just learn to deal with it and to live with it and build on it. As you said, it's not about being there for the milestones of the lives of the children. It's there to be with them on a day-to-day basis. And it does take a lot of energy. I sure
It takes a
agree
lot
with
of
that.
energy and a lot of time. And there's one point I make in the book that I know is going to be unpopular with a certain segment of the population. I talk about quality time. And I talk about the myth of quality time. That is, I think that we as a culture have alleviated our guilt as parents by saying that as long as we have quality time with our children, that's sufficient. I don't agree with it. I think that in order to develop a real connection to your child, in order to really understand who your particular child is, their particular feelings, their particular abilities, their particular conflicts, their particular fears, that has to require more than 15 minutes a day. And for the child to feel really connected to you as a parent and to feel that they are important to you as a parent. Because the message that every parent gives implicitly when they spend a lot of time with their children is, you are very important to me.
And the more you know about your children, obviously the more you'll want to be with them, the more important you are in their lives, and the better parent you'll be as well.
Well, perhaps even more important is I devote a whole chapter in the book to how to enjoy your children more. That is one of the reasons I think that dads aren't more involved, is because they don't enjoy the time they spend with their children very much. They see it as, well, another responsibility, another thing they have to do. It's weekend time and they've worked hard all week and they'd rather be on the golf course or they'd rather be watching the basketball game on TV. And they think to themselves, well, I need some time for me, I need to relax, and taking the kid to the park, you know, is really just going to be a hassle, and you know, because kids whine and they get hot and they start complaining, and who needs it? And indeed, you know, when that is your experience, it's not a very attractive one. So I think for fathers to want to be more involved with their children, they also must learn how to enjoy the time with their children more.
I agree. You make the point that it shouldn't be a burden. Fatherhood should be enjoyable, and it should be a process that you grow, that you have balance in your life, and that will benefit everybody in your family. And I agree with that. You said also at one point in your book that being a father results in values changes from materialistic to interpersonal. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Well, I've become very pro-children, pro-having children since I've had my own, because I've become really struck by how one is forced to give up some of one's narcissism, some of one's self-centeredness. And I think that that's all to the good. When I spoke before about the benefits to the father about being a more involved parent, that's really what I was talking about. That is, it forces him to shift his focus a little bit from the material world, from the world of achievement, to the world of interpersonal sensitivity. And when you're really involved with your child, you are forced to be more sensitive to their feelings, to their moods, to their needs. And that sensitivity, I think, is going to transfer for the father to his marriage, for example. It's going to transfer to his relationships with his friends, his co-workers, and will really become a part of himself.
I think it is even more global, and it really affects my perspective on how I view people, complete strangers. But just the fact that you said somebody is somebody's daughter or parent or relative, and you view people differently because of this, the sensitivity and awareness that you have as a result of being a father. At one point, too, you mentioned that sometimes dads don't get as involved in the process as they should because they think it's a wife's job, without ever really having an idea, or at least a solid idea, of how important it is to have a father there in a marriage, as well as how much work it is for one person to try and do all the things on a constant day-to-day basis.
There's no question that most fathers don't view themselves as co-parents. They view themselves as helpers to the mom. Again, I don't think there's any big secret to why that's so. We as a culture do not reinforce men seeing themselves as fathers. Men don't pat other men on the back for being a good dad. They don't walk over and say, hey, you're a terrific dad. They pat you on the back and say, hey, wonderful project you just finished. Hey, I heard about the raise you just got. I heard you're a terrific stud. I heard about that new car you got, the great basketball game you had. But nobody says you're a great dad. Our culture doesn't value that. It doesn't reinforce that. If I can give you a concrete example, a recent study of Fortune 1000 companies indicated that almost a third of them give paternity leave, offer paternity leave to their employees. Upon closer inspection, only 1% of the men in those companies took advantage of that leave.
Doesn't speak well for the male gender, does it?
it doesn't speak well for our cultural ethic. That is, what men understand, and the reason only 1% took the leave is because that other 99% view taking the leave as what they term career suicide.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we live in a culture that men didn't want to participate in that process. They didn't feel they could participate in that process without jeopardizing their jobs.
That's right. That's right.
Situation.
If you leave at 4:30 because your son has a little league game, I mean, the other guys may say, "Oh, you know, have fun. Isn't that terrific? Oh, enjoy it." But they're thinking to themselves, "Oh, he's not really committed to this job," or "Oh, he's really a wimp." So I think until attitudes change on a larger scale, it is going to be difficult for fathers to feel comfortable seeing fatherhood as such an important element in their life.
And it has such long-term implications. If you're not raising a good child that's going to be a good adult and a good citizen, so to speak, later on, it has societal implications.
Exactly, and one of the points I make strongly in the book is that as parents, we're all concerned about our children. You know, we're all concerned about what's going on in the world and the violence and the drugs and the sex and all of that. And yet, if you think about it, there is absolutely no one in the world who has the power that you have as a father to influence the values of your child, to instill in them a sense of self-esteem, to instill in them a sense of I'm a good person, I don't need to do all that in order to feel good about myself. So why abdicate that role?
Yeah. It's funny because I use my children to try and bring some balance to my life, and I think we all feel pressured in our work lives more than we would like to. But they have such a sense of humor, and they're so spontaneous, and they just are wonderful in terms of helping me keep my other parts of my life in perspective.
Yeah.
And I'd hate to miss that.
Yeah, again, I think that's one of the tremendous benefits of being an involved father is that you do develop perspective about life, and you are able to really appreciate what's important in life. Because when you ask men, if you ask a typical father, what's the most important aspect of your life? He'd probably say his children, but he doesn't live his life that way.
Yeah, it's true. At one point in the book, too, you suggest that fathers spend at least 2 days full-time with their children to get an idea of all the subtleties, all the demands, all the stresses that the traditional family, or the mother would be dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's very appropriate. I don't think most fathers that are just part-time fathers have any sense of all the constant things that they have to put up with, the parents, and particularly mothers, have to put up with, the spillings of the milk and the cereal going all over the kitchen, and it's just the third time that morning that the kitchen has been swept. It's a very, very difficult job, and I think a lot of men don't give women the recognition they need or deserve because they just aren't there as much.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of men think to themselves, and again, we're talking here about homes where the wife is assuming a rather traditional role, about being home with the children most of the time. I think men have absolutely no appreciation of how difficult that is. On the contrary, they think to themselves, oh, gee, what is she doing while I'm out slaying dragons, while I'm out in the real world with all of its stresses and pressures, and she's home having a good time with the kids. And truly, until you take that responsibility for a day or two at a time, I think you don't have any real appreciation of what it is for your wife. And you know, when the father walks in the door at the end of a long day, and mother greets him with, "Here, you take the kids. I've had enough of them all day." And the father thinks to himself, "What are you talking about? I've been out in the real world. I've had the rough day. What are you complaining about?" So again, I think it's terribly important in order for him to develop greater empathy.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think parenting forces one to mature. If you can't approach the parenting process from a mature point of view, it's just going to plant seeds that are going to pay off in the wrong ways later, I'm afraid.
Absolutely, and when you talk about seeds, again, I think one of the important points I make in The Gift of Fatherhood is that if you're a good father, if you have a close relationship with your child, it's more likely that your child is going to be a good father. It's more likely that your grandchild is going to be a good father. Those things are passed on from generation to generation. The way that we are as a father is very much influenced by the father model we had as we were growing up. So again, if you want to...
Positively and negatively.
Positively and negatively. And if you want to get a head start on your future generations as well, probably the best investment you can make is to provide that kind of father role model for your son.
One of the things that I don't like, that I see frequently, is that parents expect children to be little adults. They don't view kids from the kid's perspective. They expect children to react differently in situations. They expect them to act differently in certain situations as though they were adults. They have forgotten that they were children at one point in time, and it's easier to act as an adult or react as an adult in most situations, but it really is not fair to the child. And I think you bring that out in your book too, that try and view the world from the child's perspective and enjoy that perspective.
Absolutely, and one of the examples I give in the book is an example that we've all dealt with. You're going on a long ride with your children, 5-hour ride, 6-hour ride in the car, and the children are getting noisy in the back and they're getting uncomfortable. Daddy, I'm thirsty, can't we stop? I'm tired, and they're hitting the front seat with their feet, and they're right, and they're making a mess, and you're getting increasingly irritated. And again, you can forestall, you can save yourself some of that irritation if you understand from the outset that it is unrealistic to expect your 5-year-old in the back to be able to travel in a car for 6 hours straight and not get cranky. That is, you have to prepare ahead of time and know that this 5 or 6 hour trip is really going to take 8 hours, because we've got to stop along the way, and we've got to let them have, you know, a chance to vent some of their energy, and we've got to make bathroom stops, and we've got to get sodas, and we've got to do all that in order for me not to get crazy about what's going on in the back seat.
I think it's really a matter of expectations a lot of times. And, you know, if we expect them to be little adults again, we're going to be frustrated. They're used to being out in the yard running all day, and suddenly they're confined to a car seat, as you said, for hours at a time. And it's not fair to them for us to think that they can deal with that in a constructive way. So, one part of your book that I like, too, talks about the qualities of a successful marriage. And some of these things included constructively resolving conflicts, spouses that trust each other, spouses that respect each other, that have a long-term perspective, that are committed to the relationship. I feel that's very important. Could you give me a little bit more information?
Yeah, let me pick up on 2 of those that you mentioned, for example. People often come to me in my practice, in my clinical work, unsure about whether or not they should marry a particular person. The relationship perhaps has been, you know, stormy, it's had its ups and downs, and there's a lot of ambivalence about moving forward, usually to a commitment to marriage. Oftentimes these people say to me, we have a great time together, we have so much fun together, we never fight, we never argue. I say, you've never had serious arguments? And they say, no. I say, well, then you can't get married yet. You can't get married yet because the true test of a relationship is not whether or not you can have fun together. The true test of a relationship is how you resolve conflict together, is how you're able to work out your resentments, your frustrations, and still keep the relationship going and in a positive direction. The other thing you mentioned about long-term perspective, again, is terribly important. I think when my parents, for example, got married and walked down that aisle, for them it was forever after. And when you have that perspective, you also work harder at the relationship because you know it's forever. You know you're going to be with this person for the next 40 years. So you may as well be more forgiving. You may as well let some of the small stuff slide. You may as well work at resolving some of the conflict, because this is it. If, on the other hand, you go into a marriage saying to yourself, well, let's see how it works, then obviously you're not going to have the same kind of commitment to work through the difficult times. And every long-term marriage is going to have its ups and downs.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. And if you can have a solid marriage, that makes the parenting that much easier. And it also sets good examples for the children about the caring that you have for one another. It's important that you have time together, and it's important that you show respect for the other gender. There are just so many implications of having a good, solid marriage. I agree, a strong marriage does help in the parenting process. Unfortunately, not all marriages are strong. So in another part of the book, you talk about divorced dads and some of the problems that divorced dads have to deal with as they relate to children. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the most important thing to keep in mind when you're a divorced dad or a divorced mom is that despite the fact that your marriage has ended, your responsibility to your children continues.
Sure.
And it's terribly important, as you alluded to before, for children to be able to love and respect both parents. And unfortunately, because most divorces end acrimoniously, there's a lot of bad-mouthing that goes on. There's a lot of, you know, gee, that no good, that good for, right? And children hate to hear that because it places them in an untenable position. Because when you say that, you're implicitly urging your child to agree with you. Yeah, he's a no good, when the child deep down needs to continue to love that dad, needs to continue to love that mom. So it behooves parents who get divorced, and I encounter this all the time, it behooves them to set aside their resentments about their ex to a sufficient degree so they can at least relate amicably and in a healthy manner for the good of their children.
And the children often feel like they're the reason for the divorce in many cases, and that certainly doesn't help the situation either.
That's a very, very common fantasy for a child to believe, and it's almost always irrational, of course.
Yes, it
but
is.
the child believes that in some way, if I had been better, if I had done something differently, then my two parents would still be together. And of course, this also fuels the child's fantasy that at some future point the parents will get back together. There's a very, very common fantasy that children of divorce have, and that fantasy can extend for many, many years, particularly if the parents don't remarry.
And that ends up in disappointment later on.
A lot of disappointment. It also ends up in a great deal of conflict if one of the parents remarries, because that shuts the door, and that infuriates the child.
True. You also talk about step-siblings, which is another issue, as we just mentioned here in your book, that people are dealing with much more frequently than they've ever had to in the past. Would you tell me a little bit about that and how you see that as a part of the dad parenting process?
Well, you know, things become very, very complicated when you're blending families and you have stepchildren and your biological children. And I think the main issue, or one of the main issues that comes up when you have this blended family are issues of loyalty. That is, children are always going to be asking themselves the question and implicitly asking the parent, who do you love most? And that comes out in various forms. When one child gets a present or one child gets a certain amount of money for allowance, everybody's watching. Everybody's watching to see who you really favor, who you really love.
Yeah, there is that competition. It's always going to be there. You also mentioned in the book that children crave love. They really want your love. And so that doesn't help the situation when they're trying to compare themselves and feel that they're not getting their share of it. Even at times when children aren't necessarily acting in such a way that we like, I mean, we have to let them know we still love them no matter what.
Absolutely, and you also trigger another thought that I talk about in the book. A lot of fathers tell me they spend time with their families. You know, on the weekends they take their families for a picnic, they go to the beach. And one of the things I emphasize to these fathers is that's great, but you also have to remember that each of your children needs a special relationship with you. Each of your children needs to feel that they are special in your heart. And so make sure you spend individual time with your children as well.
I think that's very important. One of the fascinating parts about being a parent is that each child is so different. When you think about the biological parents being the same and theoretically the socialization being the same, except there's another child, you would expect more similarities. But it's fun to see the differences and to build on those differences. And
it's absolutely incredible. Only after becoming a parent to more than one child can you really appreciate the effect of one's inborn temperament. Because you see it from day one, how different the baby is.
Yeah, you can tell the personalities almost immediately. In one part of the book, too, you talk about adopting a perspective about parenting and taking time for it. You say what I think are 5 very good points. One is there are very few things worth doing perfectly. Obviously, if you try and do everything perfectly, it's going to take a lot of time from other parts of your life. You also say that you are a good enough psychologist, teacher, and a writer. And I guess you're saying accept yourself and just go on from there. And
well, I'm always in conflict about time. We're all busy people. There are always stacks of journals on my office table. There are always things I'd love to get to, so there are always choices I am being forced to make. And fortunately, as I mature and get into the parenting role more and more, it's easier for me to make those choices and to keep that perspective and to say, okay, I may not have read every single latest journal article that I could have read, but that's the trade-off, and that's the trade-off that I have to live with.
Yes. Another point, I think it's a reality we all deal with, is you say, I only have a limited amount of time. And that's just what you were talking about, and that not only just on a day-to-day basis, but in our lifetime. And we need to prioritize our time in such a way that we do the things we really want to do and they're the most meaningful to us.
Absolutely. I devote an entire chapter, as you know, in the book to how to find more time for your children, because that's a conflict that almost all of us face.
Give us some examples of how one can find some more time. I know you suggest inventorying time and trying to then prioritize what you think you can take out of that schedule or reduce the time. Could you give us some more examples of that?
Well, to explain even further, before I said that most fathers will say that their children are the most important aspect of their life. But they don't live their life
Right.
that way, certainly in
Right.
terms of how they apportion their time. So I suggest they make a chart. They make a chart of what their priorities are in life and see how much time they're spending with
Okay.
each. And see if they can move some of that time around so that their priorities, that is what they really want to be priority in life, is getting a sufficient amount of time. And sometimes just making that chart, having it glaring at you in that way can help. And all of us can move some time around. I'm not asking for people to make revolutionary changes in their lifestyle, but we can find 15 minutes here and we can find an hour here. One of the things I asked in the book is, when was the last time you ever said after lunch, I'm going to go home now, and so I can have an extra 2 hours with the kids? I'm not saying that has to happen even regularly, but once in a while would be terrific.
Sure. You also say it's so important to live a balanced life, and I think that contributes to it, so that you don't spend all of your time at work, but having time for your family, for your kids, is so important to everybody. And then you concluded by saying, too, those perspectives on parenting, there's nothing more important than me and my family. And that tells me that you have gotten those priorities in order at this point, and I feel that way, and I try to demonstrate it as well. Being a good parent is also being silly, as you say at one point. It's roughhousing with your children, the girls as well as the boys, and I know my daughter loves it as much as my son ever loved it. And yet we have these this cultural baggage that we oftentimes bring to the parenting process that impedes doing some of those things.
That's right. As you know, I speak at length about the hesitation that many fathers have getting very involved with their daughters. Not just, physically roughhousing with them, but even establishing a close relationship with them. Fathers are much more likely to establish that bond with a son. From early infancy, by the way, there's some interesting research that shows that fathers, for example, are more likely to hold their infant son than they are their infant daughter. But I think you miss a lot as a dad. As a human being, I think you miss a lot, because having a relationship with a female, even your daughter, a young female, can again bring out certain qualities in you, the man, that I think will stand you in good stead in your other relationships.
And just giving you a whole new range of experiences that you wouldn't have otherwise had. Two children of the same gender will do that, but also two children of the different genders will also provide a whole different range of experiences. You talk about punishment at one point in the book, and you say it's not a desirable behavior, that it doesn't teach children really what the issue is. It distracts them from the issue oftentimes. Could you explain a little bit, because that's such an important part of parenting.
Very important part. I devote a whole chapter to disciplining with love, as I say. Punishment doesn't teach anything. You don't learn a lesson from punishment, except perhaps that your dad is someone to be feared, or your dad is someone who hits people. But you don't learn the lesson that your dad would like you to learn, that is, well, this is the right way to do it. There are much better ways to teach discipline, by encouragement, by rewards, I lay out many strategies in my book, as you know. But just to give you one example, spanking. I've heard many fathers say to me, well, I was spanked, once in a while, and it didn't hurt me at all. And then I said to him, let me ask you one question. When you were spanked by your dad, did you love him more? Did you feel closer to him more? Or did you hate him more? Did you feel more distant from him? And of course, we all know the answer to that question. Spanking doesn't teach. It simply punishes. It simply satisfies the father's need to lash out, to try to assume control, to assert his power in the situation. It doesn't teach the child anything.
Thank you. That certainly is an important part of parenting. And thanks for being with us today. It's Dr. Aaron Haas, who has written a book about the gift of fatherhood. Thank you for being.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.